everyone. My name is Shalhevet Schwartz, and this is Gefet on Daf Yomi. Our sugya today is on Daf Ayin Aleph. We're really in the thick of Masechet Chullin, dealing with topics pertaining to Tum'ah and Tahara. And hopefully what we'll be exploring today is a topic that I think is a little bit both conceptually interesting and also has some practical ramifications for contemporary halakhic questions, even though most matters of Tum'ah and Tahara usually do not. What we are going to be exploring today is the topic of Tum'ah Belu'ah, which, roughly translates to something like encapsulated Tum'ah, impurity that is somehow encapsulated inside some kind of somewhere in the body, entirely encapsulated and surrounded by a human body, and that how Tum'ah in such a case does or doesn't transfer. And what we're going to see is that has ramifications perhaps for the question of whether a pregnant Eshet Kohen, meaning a woman who is pregnant with a child who might one day be a priest, would be allowed to contract Tum'ah, would she be allowed to, for example, enter a cemetery. So we know that Kohanim are prohibited from contact with dead bodies, including contact through Tum'ah Ohel. So they can't go into cemeteries. And an Eshet Kohen in general, that's permitted for her, right? Someone who is a Bat Kohen or an Eshet Kohen, despite the fact that, right, she can't eat truma while she's ritually impure, she is allowed to contract Tum'ah. It's not an isur for her the way it is for her husband or for her son. But this becomes a question when there is a fetus inside of her who might whose sex is unclear and might perhaps the fetus itself might have some kind of prohibition of contracting Tum'ah. So the question is going to be, does the fact that the fetus is sort of encapsulated inside of the body of its mother, would that protect this future Kohen from the isur of contracting Tum'ah? Anyway, let's jump in with the sugya, which also discusses the case of a pregnant woman, but in a slightly different scenario. We begin with actually a rather unfortunate scenario. So a woman who suffers a miscarriage or a stillbirth, and the midwife extends her hand right inside the woman and touches this fetus. So from the moment of contact between the midwife and this fetus and this fetus's body, the midwife has contracted Tum'ah, but the woman, the mother, does not become Tme'ah until this body leaves her body, and right at the point when it exits her body, then she becomes Tme'ah. The Gemara, right, on this Mishnah, right, we get Rabbah saying, Amar Rabbah kishim shetum'ah belu'ah ina mitam'ah kach tahara belu'ah ina mitam'ah. So Rabbah tells you that actually, right, this principle goes in two directions. So right, what is Rabbah sort of assuming from the Mishnah? Right, what is clear from the Mishnah is that this vlad, that is right, the fetus that is tamei inside the woman's body cannot transfer the Tum'ah to the woman while still inside her body. And Rabbah tells you that the same holds true in the reverse. The same way that something encapsulated, which is tamei, cannot transfer that Tum'ah to the body in which it is encapsulated, or well, can't transfer out, basically. So too, something that is tahor but encapsulated cannot contract Tum'ah either. Now Rava, one of Rava's students, asks about Rava's statement. Travayu Tanane, right? We actually know both of those facts from a Mishnah. So what did we need you to say that for? Tum'ah belu'ah tanina, tahara belu'ah tanina. So we have a Mishnah that tells us about both encapsulated impurity, the fact that it can't transfer it, right? Something impure that is encapsulated cannot transfer that impurity out. And the same thing in the reverse, something that is tahor, that is encapsulated, cannot contract impurity that way. Tum'ah Belu'ah ditnan balata bat tme'ah tovel ve'ochel b'shumato hiki'ah tme'ah utme'ato. So if right now, first Rava is giving us the Mishnah about Tum'ah Belu'ah, meaning about something that is already tamei and is encapsulated. And it's a Mishnah here about a case of someone who swallows a coin that is tamei. And right while it is swallowed in right, let's say while it's in his mouth, under his tongue, something like that, right, this person can go to the mikvah, become pure, right? It's not considered tovel v'sharetz biyado or something like that, right? It doesn't constitute a chatzitza or anything like that that would interfere with the immersion, with the ritual immersion. And then he can eat truma, right? He's totally pure. The fact that he's in continued contact with this, right, contact with this impure coin that's literally in his mouth isn't a problem. But at the moment when he vomits it up or spits it out, right, it becomes tamei and it also renders him tamei. So while this coin is balua, it is unable to unable to transfer impurity, and then when it comes out, it is. Tahara bluatanina, right? We've got a Mishnah that tells you also about the other direction, says Rava. Ditnan balatabat tehora v'nichnas la'ohel meit v'hizav v'shina v'tavav v'hikia. So we've got a similar situation, but I swallow a pure coin, and then let's say I walk into a cemetery or I walk into some kind of area in which there is right, in which I'm in contact with a dead body. And then I go to the mikvah, and right, I become impure and then I become pure again, and then I spit the coin out. Harayu kamashayta, meaning the coin, nothing ever happened to the coin, right? It's not as though the coin contracted impurity along with me but was unable to be purified through the process of ritual immersion. That coin just stayed tahor the entire time. The fact that it was sort of swallowed in me, meaning the fact that it was encapsulated, protected it from the tumat ohel, from the tumat meat, that right, that it would have contracted theoretically if it had not been balua. Right. So instead, what the Gemara ultimately tries to understand is the chiddush of Rabbah. Right. Rabbah said, "Kashem she tum'ah belu'ah ina mitam'ah, kach tahara belu'ah ina mitam'ah." Rabbah said, "What do you mean? We know both of those facts already from the Mishnah that tum'ah can't go in or out when it's a belu'ah. So rather, we have to figure out what it was that Rabbah was trying to be mechadesh." And right, the answer that the Gemara gives here is Kika Amar Rabba Kigon Shabala Shtei Tabaot Achat Tme'ah v'Achat Tehora Delo Metamela Mitam'ah Mitme'ah Tehora. Sorry. That if I were to swallow two coins, right, this is sort of a new case. One was tamei and one was tahor. Right, so long as they are encapsulated inside me and inside my mouth, they can't transfer to tuma even to one another. Right, that the tahor coin is sort of protected from the tuma of the tamei coin so long as they are inside me. All right, now we're going to see a machloket Rashi Tosafot as to what exactly is the chiddush of Rabbah here and what those Mishnayot could have told us on their own, right? What is Rava saying we already knew from the Mishnah, and what ultimately is Rava's chidush? So now, right, we're really in the weeds in terms of the conversation of Tum'ah Tahara here. And we're going to start with Rashi's interpretation, where he's starting with, okay, what would I thought if I had just had the Mishnah? So de'imi matniti de katane balata bat tme'ah tovel ve'ochel demashma lo metameh adam. Right, if I had just had the Mishnah about swallowing an impure coin, right, which again tells me that this impure coin can't make me tamei while it is inside my mouth. Right, I might have thought that this isn't because of right the fact that it's been encapsulated, right, the fact that it's totally sealed and protected from tuma transfer in any way. Right. I would have thought from this Mishnah that the reason why the coin doesn't transfer, right, I don't contract tuma from the coin is because how does Rashi say it? Maga beit hastarim lav magahu li'inyan tuma, right? That contact in a kind of an invisible place in the body is not considered contact for the purposes of tuma. So the problem isn't that, or the reason why this coin isn't mitamemi isn't because um, because the coin is somehow protected entirely from tuma transfer, but just because the contact, let's say, on my tongue isn't considered to be a kind of contact that contracts tuma. And right, so this is what the Mishnah would have told me is about Magabit Hastarim. It's not the whole Chiddush of Belu'ah. But then Rashi has to solve a couple of other problems, which is we all know that Maga isn't the only way to contract tuma, right? On some kinds of tuma could be transferred through right, not only maga, but also, for example, masa, ohel, etc. And right, and so Rashi has to solve that problem too, right? Even if maga b'tasarim isn't considered maga, okay, well, why couldn't I couldn't contract tuma from the coin by virtue of the fact, not that I'm in contact with it, but that I'm lifting it up, for example. Um, for like something, right? For example, a zav, anything that anything that a zav is supporting the weight of or lifting up, even if he's not directly in contact with it, would become tamei. So why couldn't the same thing happen here with the coin? So gabi tabat lekala meimar titamet ha'adam b'masa, right? The coin can't transfer tuma to the person through masa. Why? She'ein masa ela lemisha hatum'a yotz'a mimen. So Tum'at Masa only transfers from the kind of sort right, it only transfers from the kind of object that is a sort of right the originator of the tuma. So for example, a zav, right, the zav is the avatuma, the tuma is something that comes from his body itself, and therefore he can be mitame things through masa, or it could go in here mate and nevela are the examples that Rashi gives. So, right, a dead body itself is what is exuding the tum'ah, whether a dead body of a human being or a carcass of an animal, and therefore right, someone who lifts up, let's say, a nevela, even without direct contact, can become impure from it. And right, so but the coin here, we're not that's not the situation with the coin. The coin, let's say, contracted tum'ah from something else, and because it contracted tum'ah from something else, it is impossible for that to transfer tum'ah via masa. And right, further, he says tabat ranami jitnad lo mitama machmat adam nami tama mishum de magabi dastarim da adam lo mitame. So the same holds true in reverse, right? The Mishnah that talks about the other direction, which is that a human being who is tamei cannot transfer the coin right, who cannot transfer tuma to the coin that's in his mouth, right? That is also because the contact that takes place while the coin is in my mouth is not considered bona fide contact, not because the coin is somehow sealed and protected from contracting tuma entirely. Right, and therefore, tabat b'tabat, the case that Rabbah ultimately is mechadesh, right? Lav beit hastarim shayach lemeimar behu, right? The two things, right? It's not maga beit hastarim. The two of them are just touching each other. Right, and right, it's as though harehin kimunachim b'teva v'nishmu, right? The two of them are, it's sort of like as though they're in a box or something like that. And right, then Rabbah's coming to tell us that that there's this whole concept of Tum'ah Belu'ah, that the moment that that Tum'ah is fully encapsulated and fully sealed off, it can't transfer Tum'ah, not because the contact isn't considered contact, because it's Magabeit Hastari. So just to summarize really quick, wait, how did Rashi read this conversation between Rava and Rabbah? When Rava says, oh, we already knew those facts from the Mishnah, right? He's saying that what we knew from the Mishnah was that contact with Beit Hastarim doesn't constitute contact. But Rabbah's chidush is this whole idea of encapsulated tum'ah. Actually, it's not only that it doesn't count as contact, but that once we've got Tum'ah Belu'ah, right, that is really protected from tum'ah transmission entirely. And that's ultimately what Rabbah was mechadesh. Tosafot rejects the approach of Rashi for a number of reasons, right? Tosafot thinks, no. Even with just the Mishnah, I already had this concept of Tum'ah Belu'ah. I can't understand the Mishnah as merely talking about Magabit Hastari. Why is that? It gives a couple of different reasons. So, right, right? Tosafot starts with "B'tabachin haga'ah b'meit harehu kechalal v'tum'ata bokat ve'ola." Right? If let's say I'm talking about a coin that is tameh from through contact with a mate. Um, so the if the coin became tameh through contact with a mate, it transmits impurity or transfers impurity not only through maga, um, but right, its tumah is bokad ve'olah, right? It will transmit tumah vertically, basically, even through other objects, even without directly touching them, right? Ve'afilu ritusat tachad avanim. Um, so, right, like even if let's say we're outside and right, it's underneath a whole bunch of rocks, still a person who passes over it would contract tumah from it. Um, right, shalom etamet adam mikoach beit hastarim. So the fact that it would theoretically render me impure while in my mouth, would it only be through contact with beit has, right, with contact that's considered maga beit hastarim. Right, it would actually just become tameh because we're right through to oil. So that's number one. You have to worry about that too, that the impure coin rendering me impure not because of contact, but because of right it's tum'ah that is bokad vilda. That's number one. Number two, about tehora lo mita ma'machmar adam. Right, in the other direction, mishum debate hastarim lo mitameh. Right, well, let's say the pure coin in my mouth and I am um and I am impure. Atu im nichnas adam laohel hamet v'kelim o ochlim b'komato hachanami detori. Right? If you imagine, again, thinking about tumat ohel and a kli being able to, right, according to Rashi, the understanding of the coin here is that it's protected from tumat mate from tumah because Beit Hastarim's contact is not considered contact. But what about tumat ohel? Again, says Tosafot in the other direction, which is right, which is to say, if I were to enter into the ohel or enter into the space of a corpse, for example, but were to let's say I were to hide some kind of kli in right under my armpit or something like that, which also counts as magabe hastarim. That doesn't protect me from that wouldn't protect the kli um, from from the tum'ah transmitted from the dead body. We know, after all, that you need a tzamid patil. You need something to be absolutely entirely sealed off, right, in order to be within the ohel, within the same ohel as a dead body and not contract tum'ah. And that clearly doesn't count. So again, a tabat tehora, right, a coin that is tahor, could also clearly contract tum'ah if all that it had going for it, let's say, was the fact that it was only directly touching magabet astarim. And finally, says Tosafot, when it comes to the matter of tumat masa, right, being contact through carrying or supporting the weight rather than contact itself, but we know that the right, so there, right, Tosfot basically rejects the point that Rashi is trying to make in saying that certain things that come into contact with, for example, a zav or a dead body, can still contract tumah through masa. So theoretically, without this notion of Tum'ah Belu'ah, says Tosfot, the dinim in the Mishnah wouldn't get off the ground, right? Sure, there isn't contact between hastarim, but they could still contract Tum'ah or transmit Tum'ah in many other ways, Tumat Ohel, Tumat Masa. And therefore, we already know from the Mishnah that there is some concept of Tum'ah Belu'ah, which is Einam Tamat. We already know that there is some notion from the Mishnah of encapsulated Tum'ah being protected, sealed off from transmission of Tum'ah in either direction. That's the reasoning behind the Mishnah, is this notion of Belu'ah. But still, Rabba would need to, Rabba's Chiddush is about this case of two coins, because we wouldn't know that from the Mishnah. Right? Right? So I would have thought that if I have encapsulated something tameh, right? Sure, it is sealed off from transmitting tumah to the outside. But I would have thought that maybe something that is pure, that is inside, encapsulated along with it, it could transfer the tumah too. And so too in reverse, he says, right, I might have thought that encapsulated tumah is protected from transmission out, and encapsulated tahara is protected from transmission of tumah in. But I wouldn't necessarily have known that two things that are encapsulated are kind of sealed off entirely from the world of tumah and tahara of tumah transfer. And for that, I needed the Mishnah. So for that, sorry, I needed Rabbah. So what does Tosafot say? That the principle in the Mishnah is that encapsulated tumah isn't transmitted in or out. And Rabbah's chidush is that encapsulated tumah, right, isn't transmitted even to something pure that is encapsulated along with it. So that's right, Rabbah's chidush according to Rashi and Tosafot. According to Rashi, Rabbah's chidush is the whole category of encapsulated tumah. Right, Tum'ah Belu'ah is a chidush of Rabbah. All we knew from the Mishnah was that Maga Beit Hastarim doesn't count as Maga. Whereas Tosafot thinks, no, it's an expansion of the scope of the rule of encapsulated tumah or Tum'ah Belu'ah. Now this conversation is going to take us to a more or less practical question, and the kind of basic principles that we need to know in order to understand this practical question. Number one, Shulchan Aruch and Yoreh De'ah, asur lekohen likanes tachat ohel she'amet tachtav, that a priest cannot enter into in an area in which that right and basically share covered space with a corpse or a dead body. A Kohen has to protect himself from contracting Tum'ah Meit. That's true even nowadays, despite the fact that there is there's no avodat beit hamikdash b'yaminu, right? We probably all know Kohanim who are careful not to enter cemeteries and hospitals under certain circumstances, etc. So that's principle number one. Principle number two what is the status of a katan for the purposes of separation from isurin, right? A child. So a katan ochel nevelot ein beit din mitzuvin lahafrisho. So a child who is too young to know the difference and wants to go and eat treif. Nobody has to. It doesn't. Beit din doesn't have to care about this. Aval aviv mitzuveli orbo lahafrisho meisur doraita ulahachilo biadayin. So, but there is a mitzvah that is it is incumbent upon this child's parents to keep this child from eating isur deoraita, and right, not to give him directly isur, right, ulachilo biadayim, right, asur afilu devarim shasur midivrei sofrim, meaning handing a child things that are asur even derabanan is a problem, and certainly and the parents have to actively protect the child from eating or consuming isur deoraita. So now this is going to bring us to the question about a mother who is pregnant with a child who is the mother who is married to a Kohen and is pregnant with a child. May she enter into a graveyard, a cemetery, a hospital with a dead body in it, etc. The Shach here, quoting the Rokeach actually, is right, tries to find a way to permit it, but does so in a sort of a little bit of a roundabout fashion. So he says, Eshet Kohen she me'uberet mutar likanes ba'olam. So the wife of a Kohen who is pregnant can do it because it is a sfeik shema nefelhu or shema nekevahi. Or maybe this fetus, right? We don't actually know that the fetus will come out alive and healthy, so that's safek number one, that it might never become a right. It might already be a stillbirth, chas v'shalom, or it might also be a woman, right? It might be that it'll be a baby girl, and the baby girl doesn't have a tumor problem. Out of the better of the two scenarios. So the Shach wants to permit it, right, in the name of the Rokeach because it is a sfeika. The Prima Gadim on the Shach doesn't really like this heter. He says Mashain came right. He says Hasafeka Shady Shema Nefeld Neged Harovu. That can't right. That sfeika doesn't make sense, says the Prima Gadim, because we know, thank God, most births come out right. Most fetuses come out of their mothers alive, thank God. And right, most births go by without too much of a hitch. And what that means is that one of the sfikot, Shemani Felu, is against a rove, right, against a majority, and therefore it doesn't count as a real suffix. Right? It doesn't count as a real suffix. Really, there's only one suffix here. And one suffix, right? Sure, sfeika mutar, but one suffix when it comes to an Isur D'Oraita, we have to be machmir for. Now, the Magen Avraham, on the other hand, he just doesn't understand what the problem is in the first place. And this will take us back to our sugya and the discussion we've been having thus far. So the Magen Avraham says, wait a second, right? The woman is pregnant. That means this is Tum'ah Belu'ah, or Tahara Belu'ah in this case, right? And Tahara Belu'ah can't contract Tum'ah. Didn't you learn this again? So the Magen Avraham doesn't even understand why do you even need a sfeika in order to figure out how to permit this the woman from entering the cemetery. So now there are going to be two attempts to try to understand what it is that the Rokeach was worried about, given what the Magen Avraham said and given our sugya, right? Given what we know about Tum'ah Belu'ah, and Tahara Belu'ah, right? That something encapsulated cannot contract or transmit Tum'ah. So we're going to start with the Red Baz, which is Mitov Pshitut Hadavar Ani Omer Shemasha Katav Harav Bal Sefer Rokeach Iri Be'isha Shekarvu Yamahalalet. We're not just talking about a stam pregnant woman. We're talking about a woman who's, in her 9 month of pregnancy. She might go into labor any minute. So, right, we're worried about that the baby's head will crown while she is still in this ohel along with the dead body, and then it'll be a problem. It's not a problem with a regular pregnant woman, right? The Red Vaz is on some level giving us a bit of an ukimta in order to understand the worry of the Rokeach given our sugya. A different answer appears in the Tshuvot of Shutar Tzvi, the Tshuvot of Tzvi Pesach Frank, which is he doesn't want to say ukimta. Instead, he wants to explain why it is that a case of a fetus inside its mother's body is not considered to be Tum'ah Belu'ah. Near Eliashev Kushat Magen Avraham. Here, I want to resolve this kasha of the Magen Avraham. Darokeach sevirle ubar yerech imo v'him mamash guf achad. Right, the way that we have to understand the relationship between the fetus and the body of the mother, right? At least so long as the fetus is still alive, right? Because we saw the case of the pregnant woman after her miscarriage in the beginning of in our Mishnah. But so long as the fetus is still alive, it's not like a coin inside your mouth. The ubar is considered yerech imo, which is to say it's considered to be a part of the mother's body. It's almost like it's another limb of the mother. And therefore, right, v'gam havlad mismak shehu ke'echad me'evara. The same way that when I walk into a cemetery, I become tamei, and so do all of my body parts, my hand, and also my tongue, let's say, even though it's in my mouth, right? It's still tamei because it's a part of my body. So too, this fetus would contract Tum'ah along with its mother, because it's not really considered to be Tum'ah Belu'ah, rather it's considered to be a part of its mother's body. So just real quick to briefly summarize the questions and the views and how they relate to our sugya, right? We saw the shach in the name of the Rokeach permits an Eshet Kohen to enter a cemetery because of a pregnant Eshet Kohen because of sfeika. The Pri Megadim doesn't understand the Rokeach's ruling. He doesn't understand the sfeika. He thinks there's really only one safek and therefore it should be asur. But the Magen Avraham doesn't understand why it should be asur in the first place, because after all, right, it's considered encapsulated, right, inside its mother, and therefore its Tahara Belu'ah shouldn't be able to contract Tum'ah. And the Radbaz and Pesach Frank both try to explain what the Rokeach must have been thinking in light of the Magen Avraham's question. The Radbaz via Nukimta, the Rokeach's case referred to a fetus in the final months of gestation. The woman might go into labor any minute. Ritzu Pesach Frank says no. There's a special principle about how we view a fetus. It's not Belu'ah. Rather, it is considered to be a part of the woman's body and therefore contracts Tum'ah along with it. Just to summarize, right, we saw this concept of Tum'ah Belu'ah, the machloket between Rashi and Tosafot about how to understand what was already clear from the Mishnah. Was it just a deen about Maga Beit HaStarim, or was it the whole concept of Tum'ah Belu'ah in the first place? And therefore, what was Rabba's Chiddush on top of that? Then we saw the ramifications of that for this particular halakhic question about an Eshet Kohen while she's pregnant, what kind of Tum'ah she has to be careful for, and what she does not. Thanks so much, and see you next week.